Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sri Narayan Murthy in the morning said that our nation is face to face with a great window of opportunity, an opportunity that has the potential to change the very path the nation had traveled so far. Mr. Sachin Pilot is one such face right on that window. A young politician who's so unlike the stereotype Indian politician. Someone who has very ably taken the mantle from his illustrious father, the late Rajesh Pilot. We are sure that in the years to come, we would see his young shoulders taking on the responsibility at being at the helm of policy making of the country. We look forward to that, sir. It is my honor and privilege to call a man who is comfortable with the dusty roads of Rajasthan as much as he is with this distinguished gathering here at IMA today. May I now request the session chairman, Mr. Shamit Dave, President IMA and Managing Director Dave's Men India, to kindly escort Mr. Sachin Pilot to the stage, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pilot. Thank you, Shamit, for arriving on the stage, please. Now, can we have the AV of Mr. Sachin Pilot, please?
Sachin Pilot, smart, savvy, a polished English accent and a stylish demeanor. An MBA from Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. Hardly fits the description of a typical Indian politician. The newfound face of India and of course the new hope and trust of the Indian nation. Mr. Sachin Pilot is the present Minister of State in the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology. Considered to be amongst the younger and sharper of the young brigade, Mr. Sachin Pilot is member of the Indian Parliament Standing Committee on Home Affairs. At the age of 26, he had then become the youngest member of Parliament in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who stands effortlessly in the heat and dust of Gulabpura, speaking chaste colloquial Rajasthani, heard for over an hour by more than 20,000 equally rugged people, is the same Sachin Pilot who is equally comfortable speaking in clipped English at the World Economic Forum. Please give him a big round of applause and a warm welcome.
Before I ask Mr. Pilot to come on the stage and speak to us, I would first request Ms. Vani Vaidya, Client Services Director at VBNA, to present a floral welcome to Mr. Pilot, please. So we have some formalities on the stage to complete before I make him speak. So I'll now request Mr. Anuj Kothari, editor of Indore Manager, and the Indore Manager editorial team on the stage, please, to unveil the commemorative volume of the Indore Manager. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Wonderful. Yes, it's open. Can we have the long? Yes. Just give it all up. Give it all up. Thank you, Mr. Kothari. Thank you, the editorial team. Thank you very much. Just the last minute filler. We have the AV filler, which depicts the Hope to Triumph trilogy, and this is the second amongst them. Can we now have the AV of the Hope to Triumph trilogy, please?
On 6th August 1945, during World War II, a B-29 bomber dropped the world's first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and 3 days later, another one on Nagasaki, instantly killing 180,000 people and around 100,000 more in the aftermath. On 15th August, Japan declared its defeat. 2 cities were completely destroyed. A whole generation was lost, but hope wasn't. Japan didn't give up. In 1952, after years of submission to the Allied forces, Japan was on its own with the signing of a peace treaty. Inspired by a slew of leaders, Japan's economy flourished. Industrialization gathered momentum. Infrastructure development took place. The standard of living soared. The common man became affluent. A feat that was the result of brave determination in the face of adversities. In 1973, the world oil crisis shocked the Japanese economy, which was heavily dependent on oil. With sharp foresight, barely a few decades after the destruction, Hiroshima became a city that boasted 27% of the world's automobile industry. But more troubles were heading Japan's way. On the 11th of March 2011, Japan was hit by an earthquake of 8.9 magnitude on the Richter scale, followed by a tsunami which hit a 2,100-kilometer coastline. 24,000 casualties. Airports, cities, and villages completely washed away. Over 100,000 people fled their homes, fearing a nuclear fallout, as the nuclear reactor in Fukushima faced extensive damage. Yet, Japan never lost hope. Around 22 Japanese scientists.
Thank you. Without further ado, may I now request Mr. Sachin Pilot to please speak to the audience, please. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen and young friends. Before I accepted the invite to come and speak here today, I wanted to know what it is that the event will focus on and the topic of the discussion. I was very glad to learn that the topic is one that will make all of us think and ponder not just about ourselves, but about our country and our society. So I will do the following. I don't have a prepared speech, but I do want to speak about a lot of things that I don't usually do on the political platforms or on the other arenas that I'm usually talking in. The world that we see today is not what it was even 10 years ago. And to be honest with you, the kinds of turbulences, the kind of upheaval, economic, political, that is happening all around us, whether it's our neighborhood or further across our political borders, is something that needs to be very well processed in our own thinking here in this country as political leaders, as corporate citizens, as individuals, as industrialists, as young people. And India's position in the globe today, India's position as a prominent country in the world community is pretty much well established. So I don't want to spend time in harping about the country and its progress and where we are and where we ought to go. I thought I'll focus a bit upon the thought leadership, the political leadership, and the kinds of geopolitical circumstances that we as a nation are now living with. 40, 50 years ago, in the 50s and 60s, in 52 in fact, when we had our first general election, the whole world, especially the Western world, was very skeptical about India actually conducting an election, so many tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people having democracy as a form of government, having members of parliament, having a functional parliament, hungry people, illiterate people. Democracy was for the educated, for the elite, for people who had civility, who had mannerisms. But over the last 4.5, 5 decades, we have consistently, every 5 years, proved to the world that our form of government, our democracy, the way we have actually inculcated the sense of ownership and stakeholdership in every single citizen of the 1.2 billion population that we have today, that we are a functional, though I must add, a very noisy democracy. The Indian Parliament today consists of more than 40 political parties. Coalition politics is here to stay, at least for the medium term. Because I belong to the Congress party, I hope in the long run we may have a single party rule. But for the time being, we have a coalition political setup in our governments. The move ahead started, I think, quite dramatically in the early 90s. And no nation in the world has marked its presence without being strong economically, without being strong politically. But the strength must come from within. It is not about the number of dollars we have in our reserve accounts. It's not about the kinds of militaries we have. It is the kinds of cohesion, the kinds of faith, the kind of hope, aspirations that we have within ourselves as a community, as a society, as a country. India is as large as it is. The scale and scope and depth of our nation is so large and wide that sometimes people feel, how can we survive as a nation? And we must take a moment to step back and think of the last 6 decades, how we have been able to stitch together a nation that is so diverse as it is, with 22 official languages, with all sorts of faiths and religions and castes and communities and ethnicities and backgrounds and geographical disparities, to come together and at least think and behave and feel like one nation. That itself is a monumental task. Look at the kinds of issues Europe is facing today. The balkanization of many countries, a country of 2 million, 3 million, and they still can't get together. But India, I think, has something that we must cherish. The economic crisis has come to the fore, and India's growth rates of the GDP numbers in the last 7 or 8 years has been 7-8% per year. This has not happened by chance. This is not by default. This is clearly by design. And this has happened because the leadership of the country has stayed the course. We have not let ourselves get ahead of ourselves. People blame India for not having enough reforms. And I sometimes accept that criticism, that we have not been able to reform our economy as fast or as quickly as some people in the Western world want us to do. But India is a unique country. India is not a a nation where you can have reforms in 2 or 3, 6 months. It is a country that every single step of our political reform, our economic reform, has to be very well thought out, and the consequences very well understood before we forge ahead. India's growth today is not just because we have a strong economy. India's growth and India's inherent strength comes from the fact that we have a sector-wise growth rate in almost all the areas. And India's young population, I was seeing the introduction on the audiovisual film, a very, very charitable film. It makes you sound much better than you are, makes you look much better than you are. But I'm much older than the average young Indian is. 3/4 of this country is between 25 and 28 years of age. We produce 400,000 engineers every year. We are the largest producer of milk and milk products in the world. We're the world's second largest producer of fresh fruits and vegetables. We're the world's third largest producer of food grains. This has happened because we have come together. The objectives of different political dispensations and the collective objective of the country have not been too far away. The crisis that is happening, I think at least because of the disintegration of the bipolar world, is something that has challenged the Indian leadership. I belong to a political party, and I oppose my opponents for their philosophies, for their ideologies, but I don't criticize my opposition because I don't like them personally or individually. You can be from any political background, but the fact that you want to make India strong, the fact that you want every young Indian to have a job, to have education, to have healthcare, for India's economic prosperity and overall development, there can be no two views. And if there are two views, then that other person or opponent is not doing justice to the job. We have to, as a country, understand the responsibility we have. India is home for 1/6 of the human race. And what we do and say and act has an effect not just in the subcontinent, but because of our size and our geopolitical footprint, we have an effect, a ripple-on effect on the entire world. As India reaches out to the world, the whole world is reaching out to India and to Asia. The fulcrum, the nucleus of growth is not anymore in the West. And I'm saying it very plainly. It has moved east, whether it's China or India. And when investments come into the eastern part of the world, where job creation is taking place here, where innovation is taking place in this country, where research and development is becoming more of a norm than exception. And quite honestly, the difference I feel today between a young Indian sitting in this hall or a young boy or girl on the street, a 21-year-old boy or girl in this country today compared to a 21-year-old person 25 years ago, the difference is not that he or she is much smarter than the person 25 years ago. The difference is that we made the best doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers 20, 30 years ago. Most people wanted to migrate out of India. Today we produce the same institutions, produce the same young, talented individuals. But the difference is that today a young person, a young man, a young woman can stand and speak with self-confidence, because they know that the future belongs to this country. No matter what economic indicators say, no matter what criticism we face, no matter what upheavals we have in our political landscape, no matter what challenges, we will mitigate them. That kind of self-confidence in India's present, and more importantly, in India's future, that confidence comes from a variety of things. And that's why I believe that to triumph over challenges is something that this nation has done time and again. We are a country of 5,000 years of history. How many times India has been conquered, how many times people have come and stayed, whether it's the Mughals, whether it's the British, and every time we have come out on top. And today, whether there is a upheaval in the political arena in the Middle East, the Eurozone crisis, or the sluggish economy of the Americans, or what is happening in Asia, India, to my mind, stands out as a country that has hope, not just for ourselves here in this country, but also for the globe. When I was studying in the US about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I would see in the American newspapers a news item about India, about 3 inches long, one column somewhere about some plague or some earthquake or something like that. Today when I travel abroad, every pink paper, every newspaper in the world, whether it's English, French, Spanish, German, half-page articles about India's growth story, about how India today has 900 million mobile users, how India today is exporting $70 billion worth of export services, how Indian corporates are acquiring businesses in Africa, in other parts of Asia, in Europe. For 3 years in a row, Indians are the second largest investors in Europe. 3 years in a row. Indian investments in the UK are far greater than the British investments in India, a country that they ruled for decades. All this change has happened over time. I don't want to sound overly complacent when I say we are in a good position, we're growing at 7-8% a year. We have many challenges. We, our country, our society, and trust me, I know because I've had the good fortune to travel in furthest corners of India. There are differences. We have our own challenges. We have terrorism, we have Naxalism, we have our social fault lines. We seem to get upset very quickly, we seem to argue very much, we seem to fight over small things. But for a country and for a society as large as India, we have the patience and the faith and the hope to absorb all of that. Indians are great that way. कुछ बुरा हो जाए तो पिछले जन्म में हमारे कर्म बुरे थे तो इस बार हम भुगत रहे हैं और अब अच्छा करो ताकि अगले जन्म में हमको भगवान अच्छी जगह पैदा करेगा. So we have great faith, you know, taqdeer and destiny. There are reasons why in India there is no hate crime. We may have crime, but people don't hate each other because you're richer or better or more good looking or you have a bigger house or bigger car. We've reconciled to ourselves. But that does not mean that India is not aspirational, that Indians don't want a better life. You look into the eyes of young people in small towns and cities. Indore is a big city. You go outside Madhya Pradesh, small villages, hamlets, you look into a young student studying under a tree. That boy wants to reach out to the world. He does not want to get satisfied by what his parents had. He does not want a chalta hai, mera kaam ho jayega, mera pet bhar jayega, nothing. That boy wants to go places. And me as a policy maker, me as a very fortunate person who is in a position to be able to do a little bit, I feel overwhelmed that I have to be able to provide that opportunity. And what opportunity they want? They don't want sympathy, they don't want donations, they don't want hand-holding, they just want a platform to display the energy and the skills that Indians have. That's it. A good education, a fair chance to display what they can do, the amount of enthusiasm to do better, not just to earn money, to make their parents proud, to make societies proud, to make a name for themselves. It's phenomenal, the energy that you have. And you know, when I am in Parliament, there's a lot of noise, and I come out of Parliament and people ask me questions. You MPs are useless, you don't do any work, you waste time, and this and that, the other. And there is a sense of despondency. You feel a little bit sad. But when I travel outside, I believe that people expect politicians to deliver. And I feel it's unfortunate that anybody, whether it's the media, whether it's a great social activist like Mr. Anna Hazare, should paint every politician in the same brush. It's not true, and it's very unfortunate that that can happen. There are good people and bad people in every profession. There is a good artist and a bad artist. There is an honest entrepreneur, and there is perhaps a dodgy individual who does something shady. I'm not saying that every political person who wears a kurta pajama or who's elected as a corporate or MLA MP is a saintly human being. Not true. But it's also true, I ask you the question, that anybody who's in public life should be looked down upon, should not be given the credit for the job he or she is doing. Everybody works hard. But the fact that you have to be able to differentiate between the good and the bad, the kinds of people you need to have leadership, whether it's in the corporate sector or in the political field, have to be the ones who speak from the heart, who have convictions, some principles, and want to contribute. It's not about attaining personal glory all the time. It's about being able to leave a mark. And when we have a society like that, where talent is recognized, where people have the opportunity to say what they want, the freedom to express themselves, and when you recognize small victories, this is something you must learn from other people. In India, we sometimes lack that. If someone does something amazing, something good, even on a small scale, we must underscore that. We must appreciate that. That pat on the back when you're a young person takes you such a long way. And personal triumphs can translate into much larger, bigger things. It is not in our spirit in this country, and I want to say this because I don't want anyone to feel that I'm being overly optimistic. I'm only stating facts because I've been privileged enough to interact with a cross-section of society. I have met the poorest person in this country who lives in small villages, small towns, who have hardly any access to money, resource, nothing. And I've met very, very well-to-do individuals who also believe that this country has a great future. I see some criticism now about India not living up to its expectations, about India not being a favored destination for investments, about India not being able to discharge its responsibility or living up to its fullest potential. I disagree completely. We have had ups and downs, but we are now in a position today that we must be able to have equitable distribution. It is not possible for the curves of demand and supply, for the market forces to fulfill the needs of the tens of millions of Indians who need the support of the government. And I say it every time I get an opportunity. I believe in open market. I believe in investments. I believe in having the market forces decide the economic direction. The capital markets, the stock markets, the investments, it's all great, must happen. But how can anybody who works in the government not feel that there are people still who sleep on a hungry belly? How can you as an Indian feel proud when there are farmers committing suicide? We have the highest number of billionaires in this country. But we also have the highest number of children who are malnourished in this country. 46% of children below the age of 5 are either undernourished or malnourished. It's a challenge. We can't pat ourselves on the back all the time, but I know that with the resilience that we have, with the potential that we possess, we can overcome these challenges. And we are a society that's open. We don't hide anything. I'm sitting here, I'm standing in front of you, making a speech, talking about the topic of the day, but I'm also highlighting our shortcomings, our challenges, what we have to do in the next 4, 5, 10 years. There is nothing opaque about the Indian society. We have a press that is very free. If I can add, it's sometimes very free, it's too free. A democracy that is very, very liberal. So we are transparent in what we do. And this is the kind of thing we expect from government. In my ministry, we are looking forward to bringing a bill in Parliament. Not the Lokpal bill, that bill will also happen. I can also assure you, Lokpal bill will come through. But there's another bill that is of great importance. It's called the Electronic Service Delivery Bill. In this bill, we're mandating to all the state governments that here is a list of government services that you must bring online, that must be given digitally. What that means is that your land records, your home records, your admissions, your applications to bank loans, all of the grassroots issues that you have to struggle with the patwari, with the tehsildar, with the SDO, with the BDO, with the collector. You have to go 30 times to the corporators, to the MLAs, MPs to get NOCs and that red tapeism sometimes is wrongly misunderstood as corruption. But I believe in India, if you open up the grassroots bureaucratic processes to the people, where every individual in any language, Bangla, Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Hindi, who don't speak English will have access to these services, and the governments of the state will be asked within 5 years to create that space. We will give them money and resources, but those services must be available at the click of a button. When there is minimal human interference at the grassroots level, the kinds of corruption that really hurts the poor people in this country and the common man in India is not the high-level corruption that you talk about in the newspapers, but the 400 rupees, the 100 rupees, the 1,000 rupees you have to give for your school admission or to get some certification done. That is the root problem. While I fully support the effort of fighting corruption tooth and nail, it cannot be done by creating an individual or institution. It has to be done at fighting at all levels. So once you have a delivery mechanism where information is not blocked, minimal human interference, and by law, So these services will have to be made by the state governments in a 5-year time period. We hope to introduce this bill in the current winter session. God willing, it should be done. But the intent of the government of India is to make sure that transparency does not become a word that people use. It must be there in our actions and our works. These are many, many ways that we can improve our functioning. We have a lot of learnings to do. We have a lot of improvements to make. But let not that spirit die. And I'm saying this time and again because I see a lot of young people in this auditorium, this hall. And I say to all of you, this is the age where you're building the foundations, not just of your career, of your first job, or your first impressions. You're actually laying the foundations of a new India, an India in the 21st century that is going to shoulder the responsibility of a vast majority of our human race. And all of you will have the highest stakes. The generation before me, before us, has done its bit. We have got social equality, we have got the divisions of society being bridged. The socio-political equality, the fight of the early 70s, 60s, and 80s now is over. The politicians and the people of my generation will be judged by the kinds of economic opportunity we provide to our next generation. The 6.5 lakh villages in this country, those have to be the nucleus of our attention. In my ministry, we have mandated that every single village panchayat will have access to broadband in the next 2 years. Every village panchayat must have access to broadband. Internet and broadband is not something that should be only for the elitist. And we have in this country, unfortunately, a mindset. We believe that IT and computers and technology is only for people who live in big cities, who work on laptops, and who wear a suit and a tie. I want to break that mindset. With the Akash, with the cheapest tablet possible that we have in this country, we want to empower people by giving them that digital opportunity to access the world, to get information. Information is key. The nations of tomorrow will not be known by how much gold you have or how large your army is. It will be the amount of data you possess. And that data, that information, that knowledge is going to be the wealth for the 21st century. And I am so glad and happy that in this country, not only have we created that ecosystem and the environment where we are going to have that wealth, the national wealth, the human resource wealth, the talent, the energy, the enthusiasm, the creativity, the initiative, that spirit is going to take us forward. And I have no doubt in my mind, the coming years, in fact, let me be a bit more pompous about this. The 21st century is India's century, and all of you must take part to take place in that seat, in that chair, so we can take our country forward together. The only small problem is that once you give a mic that works to a politician, we will go on talking till evening comes. So I am going to try and wrap up my talk, but I'm very happy to take questions, and I want to congratulate IMA for having this wonderful event. For the last few years, I've always somehow missed coming here, but I always love coming to Indore and meeting all of you, speaking with all of you, really talking from the heart has been a great moment that I will always cherish. So thank you for inviting me here, and congratulations for conducting this wonderful event. Thank you.
Since Mr. Pilot has to leave by the 5 o'clock flight, we have only 10 minutes to take the questions. So I have the questions with me. I'll take the first question, please. Thank you, Mr. Pilot, in the first place. The question is, why Indian government people are more concerned about the global development than the internal deficiencies and disturbances? Why the Indian government or the people are more concerned about global development than the internal deficiencies and the disturbances? I think that's more relevant to the media.
Well, I believe that it's not an if or either or situation. The government of the day has a responsibility to respond to global issues. We are a very important member of the global community. We have a role to play in multilateral platforms, in foreign affairs. But at no time, and I can tell you, all politics around the world is local. So the most important aspects for our governance are local issues, issues that concern our citizens, what we can do to make laws, policies, programs. That is, of course, the primary concern, but you cannot not discharge your responsibility as a country, as a sovereign state, where your inputs, your advice is sought. And whether it's the G20 or the UN, the Prime Minister, especially Dr. Manmohan Singh, is often looked upon as someone that people look for counseling and for advice. And India's size and economy is such that our role globally is very, very important. But at the same time, clearly, the domestic issues always are the top of our priority.
Thank you, sir. This is from a young student of a college, 18 years of age. There's no name mentioned, though. Any of the party comes to the government, would you think they would be able to overcome the problems that the country is facing today? Any political party that comes to the government, do you think if they will be able to overcome the problems that the country is facing today?
Well, someone has once said that no matter who you vote for, the government always comes in. So any political party, I think, once they are given the opportunity or the mandate to govern a country, will try and do its best. I don't want to be political and say that mine is the only or the best political party, but the people decide. So every 5 years there is election, and the collective wisdom and mandate of 1 billion people is something that we cherish and we care for. But in my personal opinion, I believe a political party that has a pan-India presence, that understands the problems of the furthest districts in India, because India is a very difficult country to govern, whether it's the northeast, whether it's Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's in southern parts of India, and we have a million issues burning small fires all the time. So to be able to govern satisfactorily a country like India, I think a large party which has a history and a presence and is sensitive to the issues which people and communities have is very important. Every party does its best to discharge its responsibilities, but ultimately it's not me or you who will judge, it's the people of this country who are ultimately the masters of this nation, who will decide who will rule and govern. I can only tell you that my party has been in power for the last 7.5 years. We won the elections in 2009 with a much larger mandate. There's a reason behind it. We initiated some laws which are truly path-breaking, whether it's the right to information, right to work in the NREGA, right to education, and now hopefully we'll have right to food security. These are all really laws that have brought about a paradigm shift in India's governance. So let people decide who will run and who will rule, but as long as we have been voted to power, we do our best to make sure that we live up to our responsibilities.
Thank you, sir. This is the last question in the House. This is for Mr. Sapan Shah. What is your personal view on the subject of corruption? Do you believe that it is possible to completely get rid of corruption from India? He's also written a comment. Is it possible? If possible, when do you think it will be possible?
Well, I hope it's possible. I believe it's important for us to be realistic about how we'll tackle this. But luckily now I believe in India there is a great movement, there is a great desire of having a corrupt-free country. But I don't think it should be politicized. I don't think it's a one-issue agenda. It has to be dealt, like I said in my talk, at multiple levels. Now, the creation of a Lokpal is just something that for 45 years it has been pending in our parliament. The Lokpal bill has come to parliament, has lapsed. It has been brought in earlier. It did not go through. I remember in the NDA time when respected Vajpayee ji was Prime Minister, twice it came to parliament. It never made through parliament. But now I believe that our government is working much more seriously, and the Lokpal is being created is one aspect of it. But ultimately Lokpal, whoever he or she is, will also be a human being. He or she also has to be accountable to someone. So it has to be something that comes from within. And we as a society have to also understand that this is an issue that's now got entrenched into very deep roots, and it has to be dealt with in that sense. It's not about just bureaucratic or political or corporate corruption. It's also about the corruptions and the lowering of our morals. I mean, let's be honest about it. All of us deal with this, whether it's paying off a traffic challan or whether it's getting a small thing done or buying tickets in a cinema hall. I mean, these are all things that we have to collectively work as a society. So, clearly the responsibility is with the government, and we're doing all that we can, whether it's the judicial accountability, whether it's the institution of the Lokpal, whether it's having reforms in the political funding of elections for political parties. I think the judiciary, bureaucracy, the executive, as well as civil society, and the media, we all have to get this menace of corruption out of our systems, not just for today, but more importantly for us to have a much safer, better, secure India so that we can be all proud of it. It has to be done at a war footing, and it will recall the collective efforts of everybody.
Thank you, sir. We now move on to the closing ceremony of the session, please. Can I now request Mr. Sunil Chodia to present a memento as a token of love and appreciation? I now request Mr. Shamit Dave, the session chairman, to make the closing remarks.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, Sachin, thank you very, very much for taking your time and coming all the way to Indore. It has been a really very helpful and gracious moment for all of us that you've been coming here and sparing some time to speak to us about our conclave. We thank all the guests as well as the students who've come here today, and just a small announcement that tomorrow morning Mr. Tharoor's session starts at 9 o'clock. So please be here by 9 o'clock. The session would start, at 9:30. I would request all students to be here maximum by 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.